Welcome to Bison Jam, the podcast that covers wide-ranging topics from Yellowstone National Park and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I'm your host, Hugo Sindelar, an assistant professor of film at Montana State University. Today we are continuing our series about the devastating flood that affected the park and its surrounding gateway communities in June of 2022. In this episode, we are concentrating on the flood experience in Cooke City and Silvergate. Cooke City and Silvergate, Montana are two small adjacent gateway communities that were cut off from the park for months. This had severe economic consequences for these areas that rely on summer tourism revenue. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Chris Warren and Chris Conway. Chris Warren is a year-round resident of Cooke City that runs the Royal Wuff Tavern in Silvergate. The Royal Wuff is famous for being one of Ernest Hemingway's favorite drinking establishments during his time in the area in the 1930s. And Chris Conway is the manager of Silvergate Lodging, a year-round place to stay right next to Yellowstone's northeast entrance. Guys, welcome to Bison Jam, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Hugo. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to you and Braden and Ashley for your interest in our communities.
Awesome. So let's just jump in. Cooke City and Silvergate are actually two separate towns. Can you kind of explain that? A lot of people that drive around Yellowstone don't know the difference between the two, don't know the history. So I think it might be interesting to listeners to kind of jump in.
Yeah, it's a great question actually, right off the bat, because Cooke City was a cavalry outpost in the 1800s, and then it was a mining town with almost 10 times the population in 1900 than it has now. And then as Yellowstone Park was established in the 1870s, it was a hybrid, of both. And then Silvergate, on the other hand, was created in anticipation of the Beartooth Pass, which brings visitors in from Red Lodge to Yellowstone. So the mining community had kind of gone bust, and Cooke City was dying, and Silvergate popped up in the 30s as an entrance to Yellowstone. So that's essentially the difference between the two communities. Other than that, it's 3 miles and not much.
Awesome. Can you kind of tell us where the two communities sit in relation to the greater park?
Yeah, we're right at the northeast entrance. Silvergate is a couple of 100 yards from the northeast entrance. Cooke City is about 3.5 miles from the entrance, and we are wedged between the Beartooth Mountains, which rival anything inside of Yellowstone scenically, and then Lamar Valley, which has the highest concentration of wolves and bears in the park. So we're in a great spot. It's a little more remote, and the weather is a little more severe than other places in Yellowstone, but it's a great corner of the park.
Yeah, you guys, in the winter, Yellowstone plows the one road to Cooke City, but that's the only way in and out. So you guys can be quite remote during certain times of the year.
Yeah, true story. It's about a 3-hour dead-end drive from the 90, but that drive includes a drive through Paradise Valley and Gardner, and then through Lamar Valley, which is the Serengeti of Yellowstone. So it also keeps the population down.
Yeah. You drive in here, and we're sitting in the Royal Wuff Tavern today, for those of you not watching the video of this, and there's mountains on either side. It's probably one of the more picturesque gateway communities. So I'd be interested to know how each of you ended up in Cooke City. Chris Conway, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So the owner of Silvergate Lodging is Henry Finkbeiner, and I met him about 6-7 years ago. A friend of mine that I'd worked with in Utah actually wanted me to come out and help him just kind of develop a community out here in terms of our seasonal workers. And I wasn't really set on it because he said, well, you can be our housekeeping supervisor. And I was like, I know how to manage people. I can organize resources, but not housekeeping isn't my passion. Historically, I have spent my entire life like working in remote places in the wilderness, connecting people with nature and kind of the more, remote living situations. Anyways, I met Henry and he told me to come up here, and I went through West Yellowstone on my way from Utah up to here and spent a night in West Yellowstone and thought, screw Henry, there's no way I can live in this place like this. Because I thought all the entrances, the gateway communities were going to be similar. And I'd spent time in Kanab, I'd spent time in Moab. I was like, I can't do this. Got up to Silvergate and just like looked around at the Amphitheater Mountain, kind of the iconic view we have here, and was like, this is home. This is where I want to spend my summers and most of my time in life. So that's how I ended up here. It's 6-7 years later.
Wow. What about you?
Somewhat similar. A long time ago was just traveling national parks, and also hit Utah and Yosemite and the Grand Canyon and Bryson Zion and everything, and then found my way to Yellowstone. I had a number of friends working in the park, and I came to visit them, and then just came up to Cooke City to pick up part-time work. This is 1992, 1993, and then fell in love with the community. There are very few places like this left in America and probably in the world, and that the drawbacks might be there's no police force, there's no ambulance, hospital, no bank, things like that. But if you're willing to trade all the mod cons, all the conveniences of regular life, you get to live in absolute pristine beauty. And it's hard to turn down. And the longer you're here, the harder it is to live anywhere else.
So what do you do? What do you do in your free time when you're not running the Royal Wuff?
I do all the things you do here. You ski. I'm a snowboarder. I fish. I hike. I hunt occasionally, casually. I raised my children here, renovated my cabin, 1930s log cabin. So I shovel a lot of snow, and I work in the service industry.
What about you?
I spend most of my free time up here just hiking, fishing, just generally exploring. There's hikes you can take, but it's like, well, just go bushwhack somewhere. And my dog has a tendency to find moose paddles and antlers and stuff like that. And you find more of those off the beaten path. So just spending time exploring, just seeing what there is, and just not being connected to the internet and the phone at all times is really, I think, one of the big draws for me at this point in time up here.
Cool. I'm curious, Chris Warren, just if you wanted to describe Cooke City Silvergate to someone who's never been here, how would you paint a picture of where we are?
Sadly, the first thing that comes to mind is a TV show from the 90s, The Northern Exposure. Okay. Although that town, it's in Alaska and it's much larger. The remoteness, it's a dead end drive for about 7 months of the year. So it draws a particular crowd. Not everybody can handle the weather. The days are really short in the winter. People don't move here to get rich. They move here, as Chris said, to be close to nature and wild, pristine nature. There are other places in the country that offer that, but as far as remoteness and wildness, it's dangerous. There are bears, there are wolves, there are moose, there are avalanches, there are, and of course there are floods. And there are fires, and so it is not for everybody. And there are definitely more houses here than there are year-round residents. Most people pick their spot, pick their time to come in July and August. So to your listeners, I would say try May, June, September, October, or the winter if you're a winter enthusiast.
Great, and I think you got us to the segue about the flood. So let's start talking about the June 2022 flood event. I kind of wanted to start in the 12 to 24 hours before the flood. What are you guys doing before the flood hits? It's, Saturday, Sunday, June 11th and 12th. Do you have any idea that this event was coming?
Yeah. So just about a week before, maybe a week and a half before the flood, we had on Memorial Day morning, 2-3 a.m., we lost power, which isn't uncommon, but I think it took 3, 4, 5 days to come back on. So, Memorial Day weekend is kind of the season, like our season's beginning. So we had sent a bunch of people home, refunded their money who were supposed to be staying in our cabins. Everyone's pissed off. They want coffee. They want snacks. They want all these things. So after that, which was, I want to say about 10 days before the flood. We were focused on getting all of our infrastructure back up, make sure everything was running, all of our water power systems were working properly. And then it started raining, which wasn't uncommon. And it was about sometime between 1 and 3 p.m. The day the flood started, where we went across Highway 212 here. It was me and another employee just to check on some cabins, and the water was coming over the kind of the creek bed, and which wasn't uncommon, but this was slightly more. And it was about 1 or 3 p.m. we realized how this wasn't going to be bad. This was going to be bad. It wasn't going to stop, and it was raining up top instead of snowing up top on the mountains, which was the scariest part.
What about you, Chris? What were you doing kind of that weekend before?
I was building the Hemingway exhibit here at the Royal Wuff, and it has a window that faces across Highway 212 to the Grizzly Lodge. And Chris had mentioned that power outage. And at that time of the year, what we get sometimes is heavy snow, and that'll settle on the power lines or take trees down, and you get power outages a lot. And so I had noticed that, but I'd been here a long time through lots of, high water events and mudslides on the road and things like that. And it wasn't really on my radar. I had just getting ready for summer on my mind. We were hosting the International Hemingway Conference that summer, and I was opening a new business. And I was sitting in the front window of the Range Rider Lodge, chipping away at tasks, and I was looking across the street at the Grizzly Lodge. And these places were all built in the 30s for the opening of Yellowstone. And my friend Jay Kirby over there at the Grizzly Lodge, I was watching him kind of deal with water on his property, and it was high water, but as Chris mentioned, it's something we'd all seen before and didn't really see anything catastrophic. And then I noticed that he was digging up his driveway with a bobcat, and he was and essentially the creek was about to take out the bridge. And it was at that moment that it dawned on me that this is not just a heavy runoff year. There's something.
Yeah, something bigger.
Something much bigger is happening. And I couldn't get to him to talk to him because the creek was running through his property. And then things just snowballed from there. Bridges started going out, and I started, being more concerned about getting to my family or getting my family here, and just a little more severe event strategizing. You internalize and you think, what do I have to do? Who needs help? What's going to happen?
Yeah, what were the bridges that were washing out?
All the bridges to the Bannock Trail, which is actually an old Indian trail used by the Bannock Indians, but it's also a dirt road that's on the other side of the creek that has a lot of houses on it. And the bridges up by our softball field and dump, that one went out, and then there was a couple of others, and they went out. So there was only one remaining bridge, and that runs across the Grizzly Lodge property, and that is why Jay was diverting the whole Soda Butte Creek through his property in order to save that last remaining bridge, which would be our access to get to people. And I say our, but search and rescue and people like that. And then there were rumors of the bridge. We knew the roads had washed out all through Lamar Valley, and so there was no exit that way, which is our year-round entrance and exit. And so then there were rumors about bridges going out east of us on the Chief Joseph Highway, and so then all of a sudden you're facing like an isolation situation, and then you just kind of circle the wagons and hope for the best.
So you see your friend Jay, correct, across the street, kind of trying to divert the river and save this bridge to his property. So you realize at that point, you've been here how many years?
In 2022, I'd been here 29 years.
So 29 years, you realize this is probably the worst flooding you'd seen in those 29 years.
Yeah, there was a couple of years where picnic tables were floating through the Lamar and creeks got washed out and things, but yeah, it was looking pretty severe. And then when I started hearing about the roads in Lamar, that's something that never ever happened.
Wow. And so what do you do in the subsequent hours after you realize this is a major event?
I have children that were born and raised here, but they go to high school elsewhere. So my initial reaction was to get across the bridges to the east so I could collect my children and hopefully get them here if it's not the worst place to be isolated. If we were going to be isolated, but at least get across those bridges before they washed out, so I could, they were just getting out of school, and that was my initial push was to get the family together and take care of mine. Now, to be honest,
And were you able to get to them and bring them?
Yeah, yes, I was. And then actually, and I don't know whether to credit the Wyoming Department of Transportation or lots of local residents, but there were people that shored up those bridges to the east. And then my next thing was to communicate with the Hemingway Society, because we'd had our conference canceled because of COVID in 2020. And these are international conferences every 2 years that are all over the world and pretty big events. And they'd heard about it. So essentially get to the kids and then talk to the Hemingway Society and see if we can even pull this thing off, or if there's going to be potable water or a road in or any of that stuff. And then get back here. This is my home. And so that was my priority with those two things, and then get back here.
And so Chris, you have properties down by the river. So we have the rain event. We realize the river's up. It's kind of historic proportions. What's going on for you in the subsequent hours?
Yeah, so we have 9 different smaller rental cabins down on the other side of 212, on the other side of the creek, the Soda Butte Creek here. And so about sometime between 1 and 3 in the afternoon, we kind of made the decision right then, just because I was unsure of the bridge on the dirt road that goes across there. The bridge, it's on Monument Road. We've always joked about it getting knocked out by normal high water in a tree. So we decided to cancel all reservations, kick the people out of that side. It's not kick them out, but it's like really for their own safety. Get everyone off of that side of the river, just because of the unknown of the access to that side of the creek as the water continues to rise. So we evacuated everyone from that side of the road by 4 p.m. At that point, the creek was coming up over the bridge, which was being redone later that fall anyways. But so we evacuated everyone from over there about 8:30. It was probably like 9:30 at night. I had an employee on a 4-wheeler going to get some stuff from an employee housing we have over there. And the person who lives in Cooke City, who's in charge of kind of maintaining the county roads, was officially shutting down Monument, saying there is no access to get down to that side of the creek. We sort of bartered with him, and he allowed us to go get a couple things from the other side of the creek. Someone on a normal 4-wheeler was standing on the seat and still was completely soaked by the time they got back. About a quarter-mile ride there and back. So at that point, we kind of hold up here actually in the Range Rider, because we're like, okay, we're far enough from the creek. Like Chris Warren was saying before, neighbor Jay Kirby was having more water issues being on the other side of the creek, and he invited me over for dinner, and I looked across at the creek running through his road and his property, and I said, I don't think I want to do that. So he invited me over for a drink, and he drove across in his big pickup truck and was there for 5 minutes and said, I can't get stuck on this side of the road. He drove me back. I went to bed by 11 o'clock, woke up at 3 in the morning to one of our employees saying, this is bad. I'm not sure what to do. And I was like, it's 3 in the morning. What are we going to do at 3 in the morning? Then I woke up at about 4:15 to one of our guides. We have Silvergate Guides. We do wildlife tours based out of Silvergate. We're the only guide company in the area. We just started, and our most tenured guide called me at 4:15, said, I canceled my tour. I said, what do you mean you canceled your tour? We've had this company open for not even a week, and you canceled our tour. Well, Yellowstone's closed. I said, oh. And so I'm not sure if we can use profanity here or not. But so I came down and I met him in front of our general store. And if you've ever been to this Silvergate general store, it's probably a normal high gear. What do you think, Chris? Like maybe 150, 200 yards from the creek?
Yeah, if that. 100 yards, just on that bend by Mickelson.
Yeah. And so I stepped out of my truck and I had my muck boots on, and it came up over my muck boots to about my knee. So we woke up all of our employees who were all staying in the Range Rider Lodge here, thinking this is a high point. They were all in the second story. Had all of our guests evacuated from the area by 6 a.m. So that's, waking up people at 30 different rental cabins, telling them it's time to go home at 6 in the morning. And they say, well, when you go to Yellowstone, we say it's closed. And they try to explain to people, it's like, this is an emergency situation you've never seen before, because none of us have ever seen this. Get the out. As we were doing that, we quickly realized that power hadn't gone out, but was going to go out. We have a bunch of backup generators for our water systems here, as well as some of our heating systems. Most of our heat is just propane. There's no power involved, but we need extra gasoline and diesel to run our Bobcat, to run our extra generators if we're going to have an extended period of no power. So we sent a couple of our maintenance guys up to Cooke City to fill up all of our gas tanks at about 7 o'clock in the morning. And what's the name of the area that always washed out right by the church there, Chris?
Oh, that's the mudslide I mentioned. I'm not. Yeah, it's just partway through, and there's a lot of drainage from the Beartooth Mountains are directly north of us, and so there are some drainages that have been washed out in the past, but yeah, that thing came across the road, and
so they went up to get gas. They're coming back, and they come to me, and I'm like, I'm kind of busy right now. Just go gas up everything. Go get more of this. No. You know where the mudslide goes across the road and takes them a day and a half to clean it up? That's happening now. So we knew we couldn't go to Yellowstone. We're about to lose access to Cooke City.
yeah, and
So at that
Sheep
point,
Creek was washing out too. Sheep Creek was taking out the road in between here and Cooke.
we just evacuated. I told everyone, get what you need. Called Henry, the owner, who was actually driving up that day. It was a great time. Him and his counterpart, Stefan, had spent the night in Cody, per me saying, I don't know what you're going to do here. I wouldn't recommend coming up right now. And they rented a couple rental houses to get our employees to go back to in Cody. One was in Laurel, one was in Cody, just because if we were going to have a season after the flood, because we didn't know what extent of damage would happen. We couldn't lose 15 housekeepers and continue our season. So yeah, by I think 9 o'clock, all of our employees were, including myself, were completely out of here. Big props to the volunteer emergency medical services here, as well as the fire department.
How did they get everyone out of town?
How did they get it? They tried to get everyone out of town. As I was driving right past the church, one of the local people had kept the road open long enough to allow me to get out. As the last person from our company in Silvergate, a few of our neighbors stayed in the area, as well as one of our employees who has a house down the road. So we were all out of here by 9 a.m. The big day of the flood. And the next day we came back up to sort of survey the area. It was kind of treacherous getting through all the rocks on the road. But that's my flood story.
What did you guys see from the creeks and rivers and compared to like a normal high water year? So it's a time of year when there's snow melt anyways, so your creeks are up. But I'm just curious how the flood compared to a quote normal year. Nothing's ever maybe normal.
Yeah, and in my experience, this is June 11th, June 12th. I think we had the flood. I don't remember a lot of days. I can't remember my mom's birthday, but I remember that. But the big thing is, normally, I'm taking reservations all winter, and people, they want to come here and they want to fish, and they want to fish the creeks, and they want to fly. I tell them not to bother coming until the 4th of July, because that's, in my experience, and Chris, you'll have a better gauge on this, when kind of the water starts to go back down. So in my small experience of 6 years being up here, that was a very early high water mark. But I don't have a whole lot to base that on. It's just 6-7 years up here.
Yeah, I've seen some crazy high water, but it's usually just, a really hot day, and if you have a plan, if you're going fishing or hiking and you're trying to cross a creek and you get to it, and I've heard boulders rumbling along the bottom of the creek while I'm trying to cross it, and you realize how dangerous it is. And I've seen creek, trees kind of had their root systems pulled out by the river. So it's an incredible place. Because of just the power of nature that is always here. So I had seen severely high water, and I had seen some crazy stuff, but not being able to get into Yellowstone, I hadn't seen the severity down there. And like I said, I got out as soon as I could. Crossing the bridges was nerve wracking. Um, uh, but some of the drone footage I've seen, I didn't really get a handle on it here. And also Red Lodge got hit a lot harder and things like that. For us, it was access to Yellowstone and whether the bridges were going to hold. And they did. So I didn't witness anything too catastrophic, seeing Sheep Creek running across the road, seeing Jay dig out his driveway, but a lot of it was word of mouth. And then I kind of scooted east, and by the time I came back, the water had subsided. But then we started getting an inkling of how severe it had been in Yellowstone and in Red Lodge and places like that.
So, Chris, you haven't. Take us back there. You're talking about an inkling of something's worse, right? So when do you realize that this summer might be different than a normal summer?
Probably for me, probably when I was in a hotel room at the airport in Portland, and I had to talk to the Hemingway Society. I'd got out there to get my kids to bring them back here. I mean, even if we've been cut off before by events, whether government closures and COVID and things like that. And like I said, if you can get supplies in, it's a great place to be when you're cut off. That's why we're all here in some ways.
It's a place to escape.
But to me, when it really dawned on me, and I was trying to keep track of information just through friends and things like that, and I was on a conference call with the Hemingway Society, and they were just like, we don't know if we can get water in there. We don't know if we can get roads in there. And that's when I realized exactly how severe it was. And I heard that Yellowstone was shut down and not reopening. And it just became apparent that like, this is a catastrophic situation, not just, and everybody in this community makes the bulk of their money in summer. It's a summer economy. And to lose a whole summer after 2 years of COVID, it kind of dawned on me. I had a friend who'd written a book called The Capstone of the Beartooths, or The Capstone of Yellowstone. It was a geological study of the Beartooth Mountains, and he lost all his books in his basement, and having just published a book myself and having all the bookstores closed for 2 years, it was just like, you started hearing these stories and started imagining all your friends in Cooke City and in Red Lodge and Gardner just going through economic devastation. The mountains will always recover, whether it's a fire, a flood, or an avalanche, the mountains will always be fine. But it started sinking in that pretty much everybody I knew was going to be devastated.
Wow. And did you guys immediately know that you were going to have some issues at Silvergate Lodging as well?
We, on the 11th until about 6 o'clock at night, Chris Warren had mentioned Jay Kirby owns the Grizzly Lodge across the street. Like, he's been up here almost if not his entire life, 50 something years of spending at least part of summers up here. And, a couple other neighbors who have spent decades and decades in the area. Until about 6 o'clock at night on the 11th, I was like, this is just you've never seen anything. It's like, I know I haven't seen anything. And then all of a sudden when they started to go, that's when we knew we weren't really sure how bad it was going to be. We just knew it wasn't going to be good. And then the day after, the evening of the 12th, the owner of Silvergate Lodging, Henry Finkbeiner, and I came up here to sort of just survey, see how bad things were. And we were talking with one of our neighbors who had a friend coming up from Livingston on the evening of the 11th and had a story about being stuck in the park, unsure why. I think it was 6 or 8 hours. It's because the roads were washed out. They couldn't go back towards Mammoth. So they had to make the road doable to get them the last few miles here to Silvergate. And that's when we realized that it was going to be really bad. And we didn't know how bad it was until a couple days after the flood. We have a neighbor in the area who, has associations with Yellowstone National Park, who came to just sort of talk to us in confidence and just said, the season's over. And about a week later, they drove a bunch of business owners and managers into the park. I think it was 3 miles until the first break in the road. And they said, this will take us a couple weeks to fix. The ones further down are going to take them months to fix. And that's when we knew how bad it was, that our season was mostly, if not entirely, gone.
Wow. And so what did you do once you realized the season was kind of lost?
So, I mean, Henry and I had a decision to make about, we're going to lose money if we stay open. We, could have decided to keep our core employees around for 2.5, 3 weeks, shut everything down, winterize everything, spend times by ourselves exploring the Beartooth Mountains and not working much that summer and having fun. And we were thankfully in a lucky financial situation where like we could afford to take a loss. So Henry made the decision that that's not what we're going to do, and wanted to come up with some sort of plan, because like we have the means to, it wasn't easy and it's still not easy, but to lose a season and be around next season. Some of the restaurants don't have that option. Some of the smaller businesses that aren't up to scale the way we are don't have those options. So Henry and I played with it for a couple weeks, and he called me one morning at 5 a.m. and I'm just sick of hearing from him. And he goes, I have an idea. We're going to give the cabins away for free. I go, Henry? And he goes, I know, I'm stupid. I was up all night. I'm trying to find, I know, no, you're not wrong. Pay what you can. Let's have people pay what they can to get people into the Beartooth Mountains, like into this small part of the park we can get into. We had got some e-bikes to sort of like get some people in and out of the park, even if it was just 3 miles for a couple of weeks, then 1 mile as they began the construction. So Henry decided he was willing to take a financial hit and build community and keep some core employees, and we did it. We had the most fun season we've ever had in some ways, and built better relationships with our neighbors and fellow business owners and managers. It was a fun season, not financially, but
not financially.
Yeah.
Were there other events that went on that either of you took, community rebuilding events, or?
Chris, you actually did a ton with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the lodge that the bar is in is the Range Rider Lodge, and it's historic. It's a gem of Greater Yellowstone. It was built in 1938. It's one of, if not the biggest log structure in Montana, but also it became a resource for community events. We had a local musician Jeff Meniway, who's been born and raised here and been playing in B-Flips among other bands, and he played every Monday. And that was just to essentially lift the community. And Chris and Henry were very focused on mental health. And so we were able to do game nights and book clubs and music, and then any sort of large meetings with park people and road updates and things like that. And so the Range Rider Lodge kind of became a focal point, and a meeting place. And we just kind of all switched to just taking care of each other a little bit, because it was hard on everybody, and there was still people here. So even if we're not going to make any money, we need to be able to come together, and we need to be able to get through this summer. And for me, obviously, it hit you a little. It hit Chris, my friend here, a little sooner, that the opportunity to see Cooke City and the Valley and the Beartooths and Yellowstone empty during the summer. Yeah. It took quite a while for me with the Hemingway conference and with my concerns. It was meant to be the first year of my new business.
Yeah, do you want to, you've mentioned the Hemingway conference a couple of times, but maybe just take a step back and kind of talk about your work. And I don't think people are aware that you're kind of a Hemingway scholar in this area, and what the Hemingway conference was and how it ties into the Royal Wuff.
Well, I had another business in Cooke City. It was a little coffee shop, and I had children, and we were open year round. So there was a lot of downtime, and then internet hit Cooke City, and there were a few locals who I had met whose fathers had known Hemingway during his time here. So I started chipping away at a research project that grew and grew. And because of the remoteness of this location, it was essentially kind of the only hole left in Hemingway scholarship. And I was able to just kind of stumble into it. And then the conferences are biannual, and they're international. They're in places like Cuba. Before it came here to the Range Rider, it was in Paris at the Sorbonne and the Eiffel Tower. So it's a prestigious event. But they had their 2020 conference scheduled for Cuba, And because of like political developments, they had to cancel that, and they put out an emergency call for site proposals. And I submitted one. And then I traveled to the conference in Paris and presented a story, presented a paper connecting Hemingway's final story to Cooke City, and then presented my proposal to bring the next conference here, and it was accepted. And so it was a big thing. For me personally, in my mind, it would just be a draw to the community, just a different sort of people. Hemingway people love hunting and fishing and history and food and wine and drinks. It would work. It worked perfectly. And so we did that. We put all that together for about 4 years, and then it was canceled because of COVID. And then we put the other 2 years in, and then the flood hit. And my master plan was to have my book come out, which is Ernest Hemingway in the Yellowstone High Country, and to open the business here, working with Henry and Chris, and have the bar and have the exhibit and do all that in 2020. And COVID kind of jumped in the way of that, and so then we pushed it to 2022, and then the flood happened. So it was challenging, and the one thing I will say of the Hemingway Society is they stuck with us, this tiny little community, after going to places like this year. It's in San Sebastian and Bilbao in Spain. Other times it's in New York City and Chicago, and they could have very easily given up after COVID. They could have very easily just canceled at the flood, and they actually stuck with us. And it was the best weekend of the summer, and everybody in town actually made money for 4 days. And,
it was a fun 4 days.
Yeah, and so it kind of maybe introduced the Hemingway community to this community, and not like, obviously Chris and Henry super accommodating here at Silvergate Lodging, and the lodge is historic and giant and could host most of the events, and the church kicked in. And one thing I will add is that we did have one trip. We were going to rent out the whole chuck wagon in Yellowstone for the scholars, which would be 228 people on horseback for a steak dinner. And of course, that was one of our 3 nights here. And so that was canceled. And it actually, because nobody in Cooke City was as busy as they already were, we had people volunteer to take people horseback riding and to take people fishing or flower hunting.
Wow.
And it really it was beautiful. It was a really beautiful response to a tragedy.
Yeah. So you guys were talking a little bit about kind of realizing that the summer was going to be lost. The roads are washed out in Yellowstone, and you realize that visitors aren't going to have access to Cooke City and Silvergate. I was just wondering if you can kind of share how much business you lost in whatever terms you're comfortable with.
Yeah, that's we have at Silvergate Lodging and Silvergate Partners, we have 30 different, just under 30 cabins, 5 motel rooms, a bunch of rooms in this range rider lodge, a medium and a large size rental house. I think I can think of about, then those are rented for 100 to 120 days per year. I can think of 10 reservations that weren't canceled.
So normally 120 days a year, those have rentals. Like people are there those nights. And
probably
then,
95 to 98% rented, yes.
Yeah. And you ended up with just 10 left after.
Approximately 10. Most of them are people who do come and stay with us every year, who do love the Beartooth Mountains and knew the situation. We're able to see, maybe a little clearer than us being, taking a step back from where we were physically in Silvergate, be like, this is a phenomenal opportunity to see some other things that are in the area that we normally don't focus on because wolves and bears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about you, Chris? You're trying to open a new bar, and obviously there's no one visiting. So do you keep moving forward with that opening, or?
We did move forward. We were open 4 days a week. And then one of the days we did a book club. And then Jeff Manyway playing was just such a lift for the community, dancing on this great dance floor in this great hall, and bringing everybody together. And then we did the kids' night because our softball field was washed out. So that was always Monday nights, and it was just kind of a big thing for grown-ups and kids, and after the weekend, get outside, play, have some fun because everybody's usually so busy. So we did that here and set up pickleball and cornhole and just anything like that. So we did function, but I was used to functioning at a much higher level in Cooke City financially. So yeah, for me, just listening to the numbers Chris gave you, 90% down would I can say that with confidence, like just almost everything. And another thing down here in Silvergate, we did get a lot of visitation from other local communities. Like people would drive all the way around from Gardner, like a 6-hour drive to come see us, and people would come from Red Lodge. And people, we also, if I had to go to get groceries in Billings, I would get them in Red Lodge, even if it's a little more expensive, just to support our other local small Yellowstone communities. But Silvergate being located 3 miles further past Cooke City, a lot of people just got to Cooke City, got a sandwich, had a beer, and turned back. So we weren't getting a lot of walk-ins down here. So the events help, but that was something that I worked with Chris and Henry with, and with Jeff and with other community members to. It wasn't a profit-based operation.
And those community events are important to kind of dealing with some of the fallout of the flood. So we're talking about economic damage, but both of you kind of mentioned there's also a mental health component to these natural disasters that, maybe doesn't get talked about as much in the 24-hour news cycle. So this made the national news for a little while. The news moves past it, and you guys kind of are left with this summer. So do you want to chat a little bit about how the community events kind of help the community recover and deal with some of the mental health repercussions of the flood?
Yeah, well, there's one example, but by the time anybody really looked up and recovered at all, we were closing in on July 4th, and it would have been really easy for the fire department, with their hands full with working and helping roads, to just cancel the parade and the fireworks, and it kind of just went the opposite direction. And it was a huge success, and everybody put a float together, and it was like one of the best parades ever. And that was just kind of, and then, there was another event called the 100% Ralph that was a memorial for Ralph Glidden, who was the former owner of the General Store in Cooke City. And that was put on by his wife, Sue, and supported by, that they passed on the General Store to Troy Wilson, who became head of the fire department and search and rescue. So it just became, it became more for the members of the community. And then that was augmented by members of surrounding communities too. But to just try and continue some sense of normalcy and do the events and get together and be together and help each other. And there was so much contributed by Park County and donated by people all over the country and all over the world, which helped financially. It was a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound, to use a cliche, but it was a rallying point for the community. It was, and it did bring us together. There are lots of things that tear us apart here, just like in the rest of America and probably the world. But yeah, it was just a summer to survive and do what we could for each other. And a lot of people did that.
So what was your initial kind of, how are you feeling right after the flood, and then how did these events maybe help you process the flood event?
For me personally, I was devastated. It was 2 years of COVID and changing jobs, and the tax that put on the service industry in general, with the 50% seating and things like that. And then, we're starting to see things all over the world, whether it's, fires in Greece or fires in Australia and just places, kind of suffering. And for that to hit home, there's the feeling of helplessness. And for me, I live in Cooke City and I live in extreme nature because I like that feeling of smallness and insignificance, that nature, you realize you're at the mercy of something much bigger than yourself. And the flood brought that home. And, there's good, you can draw from. I love living in places where there's rock slides and where there's avalanches. It's you get to see the world happening when you live here, and things like the wolf reintroduction, and you get to see the change in habitat, and you get to see. I mean, the creek has changed course before the flood, and it's fascinating. But that sort of natural disaster just kind of puts you in perspective and makes you more sympathetic to other people that go through things like that. And just, it's a wake up call to the world we live in.
What do you mean by that?
I don't know how political your audience is, or if that's an issue, but climate change is climate change. And this was an event that probably could have happened with or without the changing climate. It could have just been a coincidental, heavy snow, heavy rain, things warm up, and it happens, but it happened to us, and it happened to Gardner, and it happened to Red Lodge, and it radiated out from that to other communities, but those three communities are the three communities closest to us, and they're very small towns in Montana in remote places. So those are the same kind of people choose to live those kinds of lives, and they're generally pretty resilient. And this was just something that hit people in so many different ways. For me, the mental health thing, I'm comfortable living in a crazy world, to be honest, but financially is where it hit, because you go through a winter in anticipation of making your money in the summer, and then you go through another winter. And so to take out your source of income for a year and a half, you start realizing that that's going to have a profound effect on a lot of people.
And so what were some of the financial resources that were available? I'm sure there were Band-Aids on gunshot wounds, as you said, but
can you talk to some of that, and I'll take a turn?
Yeah. I mean, back to the initial question or to the financial stuff?
The financial stuff, I know Henry giving away rooms brought people to the community.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think to just take one step back, one thing a positive that came from the flood for us at Silvergate Partners. And Silvergate Partners is Silvergate Lodging. We have cabins. We have our general store. We have a guide business. We have the Range Rider Lodge. There's probably some other parts I'm forgetting. Like Chris has the Royal Wuff Tavern here. It's very much so. Our mission is to get people into nature, to have people spend time in nature, because we believe we're better people when we spend time in nature. So when the flood happened, we were able to take about 72 hours to a week and just sort of reassess, are we going to be open in any sort of way? And, me as the general manager, where I don't have any skin in the game, it's not, I can make more money, but I can't lose more money. When Henry made the decision that we're going to stay open, and we collaborated and came up with we're going to invite locals to come up here and pay what they can to stay in whatever cabin they want to stay in, as long as we have availability. That allowed us to focus less on, we're not a not-for-profit organization. We want to get people in nature, but we also want to make money. So during this flood season, after the flood, we quickly made the decision, we're not going to focus on making money. We're going to focus on getting people outside in nature. So, at that point, we just did everything we could to get people up here. We bought e-bikes. We have a local contact with, I forget the name of the news organization in Billings, who came up here and did something about our e-bikes and the flood recovery and all that, and just tried to get people up here to spend time in nature. While losing many dollars every day, we remained open.
For me, being in the service industry, I just saw it wash down, as VRBOs get canceled, then the people that clean those VRBOs who might have children, dishwashers, busboys, bartenders, waitresses, people that own the businesses, people that own the rentals, but then the people that subsist off maintaining and cleaning and serving. And that's what we do here. We're a tourist-based economy. And so I just slowly got to see it, the economic devastation just wash down. through pretty much every, I mean, some of the construction guys did okay on repairs, but mostly the economic hit was huge. And there were relief funds from Park County and national relief funds and FEMA, and there were funds started by Henry and Chris and that were just a destination for people, because people have been coming here from all over the world. It's very close to a lot of people's heart, whether they're from the East Coast or whether they're from Germany or Australia or all over the world, and so there were people that donated, and I know there was as funds were starting to dwindle, there was a benefit concert by Bob Weir and John Mayer of Grateful Dead or Dead and Company that generated another $2 million through live streams and they played in Paradise Valley. So it was just kind of an all hands on deck. But yeah, a lot of the government agencies, like the work that Jim Halfpenny did and the Park County Foundation and then even smaller funds that were created here, and people were very, very careful about how to distribute those funds and who gets them, and it, like I said, it wasn't like working all summer, but it helped.
Was that funding crucial to you making it through that winter, or at least helping you make through that winter?
Yeah, helping. I mean, helping us, people like myself, for sure, 100%.
What does it mean to you to get that support?
For I don't know. I've always been kind of self-sustaining. It was great, but also it's humbling. Like I don't want free checks. I want to work for my money like I always have, and I've always managed to get by. But so yeah, it was humbling, but man, it was helpful, big time.
Great. Well, you mentioned something, Chris, when you were talking kind of about climate change. I wanted to jump into that and ask you guys if after this event, if you're kind of worried about these events in the future and how if you've seen any changes in these ecosystems in your many years here in Cooke City, Silvergate area.
Well, I got here shortly after the Yellowstone fires of 1988, but the fires have been burning forever and will burn forever. So, looking back now, you can say, we were a part of history. My business opened that year, the year of the Great Flood, and they were calling it the 150-year flood. I don't know if there's record of a flood 151 years ago that was like this. Probably not. But it's nature, and we've seen the wolf reintroduction in the 90s. This was also a mining community, and there was a lot of toxic water, and so there was there was a mine tailings pond that has been reclaimed. We get to see the trees grow back after the 1988 fire, and we get to see these changes happen, and we got to see the habits of the herd animals and the predators change with the reintroduction of wolves. And now we get to see brand new roads. I think of, I know there was a smallmouth bass caught at the confluence of the Lamar or the Gardner River and the Yellowstone. And that had people, fishermen and scientists, terrified, because it's an invasive species that would just devastate our native trout population. And then to see the flood just kind of clean out the entire river system. Yeah. It's going to take a while for the bugs to get back, but the fishing was good at the end of the year. It was good last year. And it's for me, I'm always conscious of climate change. And, every time we get a cold winter, it's like, oh, nothing's happening, nothing's changing. But it is, we had after last year wasn't a great summer. The weather, it was cold. I don't think people knew that we were open necessarily this end of the park. And then this last winter, we got very little snow. So regardless of where you stand on the issue, it's something you just have to accept and, change if you can, and then pivot, right, and just adjust your lifestyle, adjust your business model, and pay attention.
Are you worried about flooding in the future after this event?
No. I'm sure it'll happen. I'm sure it'll happen, but after this one, it's like, you make changes in your life to better prepare yourself. Whether you stock the freezer a little bit more, or whether you learn to live a little more simply, and maybe expand your season, or just be prepared, and I have a lot of friends that were here in 1998 or 1988 for the
Yep,
fires.
for the fires.
And it was a similar situation, where you just kind of tighten your belt and grin and bear it. And if depending on how you feel about these things in your personal life, try to live simply, live more simply, need less things, and enjoy nature. And much like Chris was saying, you don't really need the flashing lights,
Right.
to enjoy this planet.
So maybe build a little more resiliency for extreme events into how you live in this area.
Yeah, and understand where you live. You're always going to be at the mercy of something much more powerful than yourself, and there's no place to feel that feeling like here, like at the northeast entrance of Yellowstone and the Beartooth Mountains.
Chris, I'm interested in your take on any changes you've seen, or if you think there was any role from climate change in this event, or maybe making future events more likely, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, my experience up here is somewhat limited, where this is my sixth year up here, and I can't say sixth. But so I'm not going to pretend to have a ton of experience up here. I have been up here for 6 years, and I lived in Utah for 10 years. I lived in the Big Island of Hawaii for almost 4 years. And what I tend to do is I listen to people who have been around. I listen to people who have been here in Silvergate and Cooke City for 20, 40, 50, 60 years, and sort of get their experience. And whether it's here, whether it's Utah, whether it's Hawaii, the one thing that I do here is that things are shifting, and that is kind of the natural order of what happens, or my understanding of what happens on Earth. And in terms of things changing in the future with more floods or more fires, likely.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about it because I have enough to be worried and anxious about
On a
happening
day-to-day
today.
basis,
Yeah, and if a flood or fire happens, we'll deal with it when it happens. I do think it's more likely than it was 20 years ago to happen at a more, for floods and fires to become more the norm, the new normal, I guess would be the way to put it.
Yeah, we on another episode of the podcast, for the people out there, if you listen, we talked to Dr. Kathy Whitlock, who studies the greater Yellowstone climate ecosystem, or the ecosystem and changes in climate. And that's the exact word they use, is that floods like this may be more likely. They can't put an exact percentage or number on it, but the studies have basically shown that precipitation in the area will stay the same. It's just going to shift to kind of what we saw in that event. So it's going to be more rain in the April-May timeframe, when it could rain on snow, which was kind of the process that caused this event.
Yeah, April was always definitely a big snow month and not a rain month, and this year our whole winter seemed to have shifted 2 months, but of course that could change next year.
Let's just hope, the way they rebuilt the roads in the park, between here and Tower Junction, out the new old entrance exit out of Gardner, the roads by Red Lodge, just hope they did a good job, because if they wash out again, we'll see if they fix them or not.
Yeah, well, I think we can agree that they did a good job getting it done as fast as they did, but whether that's a temporary, and we would like to thank them for that. I think all of us
thank them for spending their money up here that season as well, the past 2 seasons. And
but yeah, it's inevitable. Whether it'll happen during my lifetime again, I'm not sure.
Your kid's lifetime, though.
Yeah, thanks. I'll let them know they don't have nothing to worry about either.
Okay, perfect.
I'm curious, do you guys think that the flood has made your community more resilient after, or what do you think some of the lessons learned in your communities of Cooke City and Silvergate are from this flood?
I think they're, without a doubt, Silvergate and Cooke City, individually and more so as a whole, are definitely more resilient after this. one positive that came from this was like I've seen business owners in Silvergate that never got along and never liked to talk, and Silvergate and Cooke City and Cooke City and Cooke City, all these business owners and people for been around far longer than I have and haven't liked each other for, they probably don't remember why, talked and communicated and remembered, oh, you vote red, I vote blue, or vice versa. We still want to go fishing. We still want to go hunting. We want to go explore in nature. And it brought us together. Like we had something to commiserate on, and we kind of bonded over it, as crappy as that is.
Yeah, it had been a pretty divisive couple of years before the flood for I think all of America, and that was set aside for that summer for sure. And that was nice to see, because in my memory things were less politically charged, 15, 20, 25 years ago. We had our, there was a mine that was going to open up here that was very divisive, and then there was the wolf reintroduction was very divisive, and we have some sewerage, infrastructure issues, opening roads, closing roads, and putting sewers, and now we have zoning and VRBOs and things like that. There will always be things that can divide us, but I think nothing unites us like a common tragedy, and then you can put all those differences aside, and that was wonderful to see that summer.
Are there any lasting impacts from the flood you'd like to share? So we're sitting here talking today in the Royal Wuff. It's May 2024, so we're coming up on the second anniversary of the flood here in a month or so, a little less than a month. And I'm just curious, everyone thinks Yellowstone's open for business and stuff, and I'm curious if there's any things you guys are still recovering from.
Still recovering from, I think a residual from the flood year is definitely, at least Henry's, I believe Chris Warren's, and my relationships with other community members are better than they were before. Not that they were horrible in the past, but we have more positive relationships with everyone in the area. And, Yellowstone's open. There's no one-way light partway between, Slough Creek and Lamar Valley anymore. We're open. Please come up and visit.
Yeah, there was a lot of last year. One, it was a really wet summer and cold summer, and two, the road construction at this end of the park was pretty stifling. It was difficult to get here, even if you wanted to. And this year, we're not going to see the flooding because a lot of the snow's gone already. It feels like a much earlier summer. And they did a great job on the roads, so that we don't have the road construction that we had last year. And I think we just need a good summer, a really good summer for everybody. And I think I already see the signs of it. The roads are opening, and that means also for the fishermen out there are some new holes to fish. You can, I forget who the philosopher was, that you can never step in the same river twice. But that's never more true than today. And I remember fishing the confluence of the Lamar and the Yellowstone with my son last year, and it was to see it that different after that many years. It's something to behold, and I'm not suggesting that a trip up here is, like tragedy tourism or anything like that, because it's still, the flowers are going to be out and the fish are going to be rising. And the people are here, and the mountains are gorgeous, and the waterfalls are full, and I'm expecting a pretty rip roaring summer. I think it's going to be great. I think
you guys are open for business and ready to
rock, man, ready to rock. And I think there's a lot of people that frequent this part of the park that are ready to come back and see it again too. The Beartooth Mountains are really something to behold. It was Charles Kuralt called the Beartooth Highway the most beautiful highway in the world. And
you guys are at one end of it.
And we're at one end of it, and we got Lamar Valley, which is one of the most spectacular, and we might be the least visited entrance, the quietest entrance
by
to
far
Yellowstone.
the least visited.
Yeah, so it's a special place for people that get to Old Faithful, and there's 10 million people there. This might be a corner you want to check out. So
yeah, for those of you out there listening, they're at the northeast corner of the park, so you'll want to find that northeast entrance road on your map, and as soon as you leave the park, about a mile down the road, less than a mile,
yeah,
on your left side will be The Range Rider Lodge.
And don't miss out on Highway 212, the Beartooth Highway, over the Beartooth Mountains to Red Lodge, or the Chief Joseph Highway, 296 to Cody. That's like a triangle you can drive that is, in my mind, more spectacular than anything in Yellowstone. You don't have the geysers or maybe the abundance of wildlife, but scenery wise, it blows anything in the park away.
What do you see when you drive that road? Give people a little taste.
Waterfalls, lakes, mountain goats. The road goes up over 11,000 feet, and there are a lot of people that never have the opportunity to visit 11,000 feet. And here you can just step out of your car and be there on the tundra. It's the highest plateau that far above sea level in the country. They're, for geologists, some of the oldest rock on the planet, 5 billion year old rock, is out there. There are 600 lakes between here and Red Lodge that are all teeming with trout, the wildflowers, mushrooms, wildlife. Waterfalls on the side of the road, lakes on the side of the road. It's my favorite place on earth, and that's why I live here.
I'm wondering what each of you's hope for the future of your communities of Cooke City and Silvergate are after the flood.
For me personally, I would like it to stay much the same, to be honest. And this is, since I've been coming here, it's people have been telling me it's going to be the next Jackson Hole. It's going to be the next this. And we really haven't changed in size. And that's because of the severity of the winters and the distance from airports and services and things like that. So it's becoming a little more of a transient community. I just hope that the infrastructure stays in place to where people can raise families here, and it's like a real community, not just a temporary community with a few holdovers. A place that there's different types of growth. And just simply building buildings is not necessarily growth, and in fact, that can just inhibit growth. You need places where regular people can live, people that want to be here can afford to be here. I don't worry about the woods. I think the woods are going to be just fine. The mountains are going to be just fine. But if we're not careful about the growth and the type of growth, you can see things such as a school in a place as remote as this, suffer, and then all of a sudden you lose that sense of year-round community that has been here since the 1800s. And just different ways the economy moves and things like that. I just want it to stay a place where people can afford to live.
And what about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think really just very similar to what Chris Warren said, is like it to think there's not going to be growth is just asking for something to happen you don't want to happen. So focusing our energies for people who have lived here for a long time and want to continue to live here towards sustainable and sustainable and just responsible growth. I spent a lot of time in Utah. I've seen all the gateway communities in Utah grow to a point where it's unsustainable, it's unrecognizable, and it's lost its soul. And I think the majority of us who have been here in Silvergate or Cooke City for whether it's been 6-7 years like myself, 20-something years, 30, 50 years, however many years, is none of us want this place to change. But we have to realize it's going to change in some way. And if we can shift the way it changes, where I don't think anyone up here really wants cell phone service. If we can all agree on that. If none of us want to change zoning and things of that nature. So it's we need to be in charge of our own growth, because to think it's not going to happen is asking for it to happen without you having a say in it. So understanding where we have a say in the growth, where we keep this place similar, where things are log cabins, the winters are tough, the summers are nice, even though it might snow a foot in the middle of July. And, we get to keep this place we love, but at the same time, creating more, back to what Chris Warren was saying, but in different words, create more, whether it's year round or seasonal, good paying jobs so that more people, like families, can afford to live here year round that want to be here. Because like most gateway communities to any national park, everyone's getting priced out. And if you go to national parks in other places, they just keep growing further and further away. But like that's Montana Forest Service, that's Wyoming Forest Service, that's Montana, then Wyoming Forest Service, then Montana. That's the national park. We don't have anywhere to grow here. So we have to manage our land appropriately and responsibly.
All right. Well, I think that's a great place to end it today. Chris and Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the Bison Jam podcast.
Thanks for having us, Hugo.
Thank you for having us, Hugo. We appreciate you being up here.
And I appreciate both of you. It was a real pleasure. And for our listeners, this was the last episode of our first season of Bison Jam. We really appreciate you listening as we explored stories of the historic June 2022 flood. We have exciting things in the works for next season, and we'll hope you'll join us for season 2 coming in summer 2025. Thank you so much. Bison Jam is a production of Hugo Sindelar Media, LLC. I'm the director and producer, and Ashley LeBow is our editor and story consultant. This episode was filmed by Braden Meyer. Our guests from Silvergate and Cooke City, Montana were Chris Conway, manager of Silvergate Lodging, and Chris Warren, manager of the Royal Wuff Tavern. If you're visiting Silvergate, Montana, please consider supporting their businesses. Additional support for this podcast comes from Montana State University. And as we wrap up season 1, we want to thank you again for listening to Bison Jam. We are hard at work on season 2, so be on the lookout for new episodes of the podcast coming in summer 2025. We'll see you soon.